Part 24. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 231. Who is there? Zhu Feng had been holding the middle-grade spiritual sword in his hand. Hearing the intermittent voice, he could not help but tremble all over and looked around vigilantly. When Zhu Yun and Tang Zhuyang abandoned him, Zhu Feng, no matter how young he was, knew that this place would be extremely dangerous. Now he was the only one left here. If he wanted to live, he had to be very alert. "Save me, save me." The voice came again, very weak. Zhu Feng finally determined the direction, but he did not dare to go rashly. Now, he did not trust anyone and remained vigilant against this weakness. But he thought about it. What if the person who spoke was really dying? Then could he kill him and then take the treasure? Thinking of this, Zhu Feng's heart could not help but become more resolute. Not only was he taking the treasure, but he was also taking away other people's immortal fate. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. First he wiped away the blood and tears from the corners of his eyes, then he followed the direction of the voice, crouched and walked carefully. He was not tall and deliberately hid. With the cover of these weeds, he found the source of the sound quietly. Someone. Zhu Feng pulled away a bunch of weeds, and a tattered black robe, extremely embarrassed and withered old man, came into his sight. "Save me." As if he had sensed someone coming, Mo11, who was almost unconscious, suddenly raised his voice a little. Zhu Feng was startled and immediately felt the momentum of Mo11. Even if he was seriously injured, he was still his unmatched existence, but he shrank his body and pretended to escape. "Save me." Mo11 had used the forbidden secret technique before, but his life weapon was interrupted by Zhu Yun. He was seriously injured and needed to swallow pills to stay alive. But his purple palace was full of holes, and his dantian was also damaged. He was willing but not strong enough. He even collapsed here, and his vitality was quickly dissipated. Finally, Zhu Feng came, and he was at the first level of qi refining, so he could definitely help him take out the pills and take them. This was simply his last straw. "There is a generous reward." Mo11 held his breath and uttered these three words. "A generous reward." Hearing that it was no longer the same old "save me," Zhu Feng's steps suddenly stagnated. He was not thinking about the generous reward, but Mo11 who said this, asking him for a first level of qi refining, which showed that he was seriously injured and powerless. In an instant, a fierce light flashed in his eyes, but when he turned around, he said timidly, Senior, I don't know how to save you." Mo11 was relieved, but there was no time to lose. He said anxiously, "From my storage bag, find a red porcelain bottle, take out a pill, feed it to me." Saying these words almost exhausted Mo11's whole body of strength. Lying flat on his back, his chest was violently heaving. But he still exhaled more than inhaled. Seeing this, Zhu Feng made up his mind. Fortunes are sought in danger. Now this senior has something to ask of me, and he can't even move his storage bag. The thought only flashed through his mind, and Zhu Feng finally made up his mind. He held the middle-grade spirit sword in his hand and slowly walked towards Mo11. Even when he squatted down to take the storage bag, he stared at Mo11's reaction. But fortunately, there was no change. Mo11's eyes gradually relaxed. He might feel that he was saved, and he also felt that a little kid in the first level of qi refining would not dare to attack him. "Senior, is it this pill?" Zhu Feng fumbled for a while, took out the pill, and moved it towards Mo11's eyes. Quick, quick." Mo11 was overjoyed and hurriedly urged Zhu Feng to feed the pill into his mouth. But before the pill arrived, there was a sudden piercing pain in his abdomen. "Little ghost, you!" Mo11 screamed in pain. But Zhu Feng took advantage of the situation and twisted the middle-grade spirit sword suddenly, stirring up Mo11's stanchion. Then he let go and pulled off the storage bag, running wildly in the direction he came from. He sat down at the foot of the mountain in shock until he felt safe. His heart was pounding, and his hands were shaking. It was unknown how long it took for Zhu Feng to calm down completely. He. Ha ha ha. He. He forced himself to suppress his voice, but it became even more weird and creepy. Is this killing people to rob treasures? Let's see what they have robbed. Zhu Feng opened the storage bag and took out the things inside one by one and placed them in front of him. Several bottles of elixirs, several magic tools, a sea chart and a black ancient book. Blood Road Magic Art. He turned to the first page, and his breathing began to become rapid. On the other side, Zhu Yunyu's flying boat had flown more than 1,000 miles away. Compared with the lifeless sea before, some flying fish occasionally appeared on the sea surface. Occasionally, you can also see flocks of flying birds. His mind moved, and he said to Sun Qiniang, "Can you swim?" "Water, you want to go to the sea?" Sun Qiniang was shocked, thinking that Zhu Yun wanted to let the flying boat enter the sea. The spirit stones are almost gone, and they will be used up after flying for a period of time at most. Rather than falling into the sea sooner or later, it is better to keep some for emergency use. Hearing Zhu Yun's words, Sun Qiniang said seriously, "I am not familiar with water, but I can stay for a while." "Okay, if you feel uncomfortable, tell me as soon as possible." After saying that, he controlled the flying boat and quickly fell towards the sea. Want to escape into the water? I don't know what tricks this kid is using, or if he really has no more spiritual stones. In the distance behind him, Tang Zhuyang was thinking carefully. He had suffered a lot at the hands of Zhu Yun, so he had to be careful. Although he was in the late stage of Jindan, people who didn't know how to swim would indeed be slightly affected in the water. Whether it was casting spells or using spiritual consciousness, they would be restricted. After entering the water, "Hold me tight, don't let go." Zhu Yun reminded with a serious face, and the flying boat was already close to the sea surface. He didn't care about the cool and smooth feeling coming from his palm, and quickly put away the flying boat and plunged into the sea with Sun Qiniang. "Hold your breath." Zhu Yun shouted again, and immediately cast the water escape technique and quickly dived to the bottom of the sea. This place is far away from the land. Zhu Yun didn't know how deep the sea was, but he also knew that the deeper he dived, the more likely he would escape Tang Zhuyang's pursuit. Sun Qiniang felt a black screen in front of her eyes, and when she appeared again, the sea water had become much deeper. She was slightly surprised that Zhu Yun could actually use water escape techniques. After staying here for half a breath, Zhu Yun used the water escape technique again and escaped to the bottom of the sea again. Over and over again, until most of the spiritual power in his body was used up, the surroundings were completely dark, and he had not reached the bottom of the sea, as if he was in the void. And Tang Zhuyang, after losing the trace of Zhu Yun, suddenly realized it. "I am so angry. This kid got the 5 elements escape technique from me, and he must have practiced the water escape technique in it. Good boy, he actually used my skills to tease me. Wow." After Tang Zhuyang entered the water, he quickly released his spiritual consciousness. How terrifying is the spiritual consciousness of the Jindan period. But he didn't understand the nature of water, and his spiritual consciousness was suppressed in the water. In addition, he was a little slower, so the speed of the spiritual consciousness spreading could not catch up with the speed of Zhu Yun's diving. Not only did he not have water spiritual roots, he also thought that he was at the peak of the late Jindan stage and did not need to practice such escape techniques. This allowed Zhu Yun to escape. Damn kid, he ran away again. Tang Zhuyang was furious and rushed out of the water. He actually gathered his spiritual power and used the golden sun curse on the sea. Boom! 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 With his full strength, This move covered an area of 2 miles in radius. 9 suns, each of which was almost the size of a deserted island, all smashed into the sea. In all directions, the waves suddenly exploded, like a tsunami caused by the eruption of sea and ground fire. The seabirds that could not fly were instantly blown down, and some sea fish were even shocked to turn their bellies up and float to the surface of the water, and then drifted with the waves. After venting, Tang Zhuyang felt a little better. He murmured, "I claim to know how to cultivate immortality, but I let this young man run away one after another. Is his fate with immortality stronger than mine?" While he was reflecting, a dark red light point in the distance slowly floated towards this place. Huh! That island can actually follow. Humph, I was led astray by that kid at that time, so I left. Now you dare to come to me again. Do you really think that I am a Jindan stage and don't know that you are just a spiritual fire? I will take you first, and then I will have the earth fire to refine the Yugui soul pill. I will turn all the cultivators in the sea area into puppets, and I will search the sea area to find that kid. After that, Tang Zhuyang rushed towards the island in an instant. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 232. In the deep sea, there is no sky. Zuyun and Sun Qiniang didn't dare to get angry and waited quietly. It wasn't until some undercurrent surged from above their heads that the two of them were suddenly startled. Strange, why does the undercurrent flow from top to bottom? Sun Qiniang gathered her spirits to transmit the message and said to Zuyun. In the sea water, you can't speak, so you can only communicate in this way. Zuyun shook his head in confusion and replied, I have never been into the sea, and I don't know. Back then, I went into the sea to hunt for treasures, Sun Qiniang said. My ice blue sword at that time was made of materials found in the shallow sea. At that time, I followed some monks into the sea. I heard that the undercurrent will only flow from far to near, not from top to bottom. Zuyun thought this was reasonable, frowned and said, could it be that Tang Zhuyang couldn't find us, so he vented his anger on the sea? Most likely. Sun Qiniang said solemnly, in this case, if we go around a little further and come out, we should be able to escape alive. Good. Zuyun was overjoyed, and he led Sun Qiniang and began to use the water escape technique to move horizontally. After spending more than 20% of his spiritual power again, he estimated that he had escaped for more than 100 miles, and then he took Sun Qiniang to the surface of the sea. The sun was shining brightly, and the sea breeze blew slowly across their faces, sweeping away all the previous nervous emotions. Sun Qiniang smiled and pointed to the distance. Look, there is an island over there, let's go there to rest. Zuyun was overjoyed and agreed. Sun Qiniang jumped out of the water first, while Zuyun had to use his sword. One after another, they landed on the island. With the soft beach beneath his feet, Zuyun finally felt safe. Hurry up and recover from your injuries. I'll take a look on this island. The sea area is vast and boundless, and there are countless such desert islands. There is no guarantee that some monsters will live here. Good. Sun Qiniang is not polite either. She is in a higher realm than Zuyun, but now the old wounds have not healed, and new ones have been added. Not to mention being found by Tang Zhuyang, if he encounters a strong enemy again, an extra point of strength is an extra point of protection. I'm going to let my dog's nose be on the alert next to you. This island is not small. I'll have to take a look at it a few times. Dog nose. Sun Qiniang was stunned and saw Zuyun wave his hand casually, and a big white dog appeared in front of him. He looked at Zuyun with a look of disbelief on his face, only to see him smile and say, something happened, and the dog's nose turned into a dog's. But just don't worry about healing, his nose is still as good as usual. Listening to Zuyun's words, Sun Qiniang frowned. How could such a good person turn into a dog? Woof woof. Gozi obviously saw Sun Qinyang's expression and immediately roared twice to express his dissatisfaction. He didn't think much about turning into a dog again. After all, he was originally a dog, but he was harmed by Ye Xianming and became an incomplete person. Are you back on track now? Are you really a dog nose? Sun Qinyang suddenly became speechless. Because she saw a familiar look in Dog Nose's eyes. Woof woof. The dog barked twice more, then lay down and put one ear to the ground, no different from an ordinary mortal watchdog. Zuyun chuckled lightly and stood up on his sword. After walking around the island for a week, he frowned. He always felt that something was wrong, but for a while, he couldn't tell. Just when he was confused, Goza suddenly stood up and barked at Zuyun in mid-air. This is danger. Zuyun's face condensed, and he quickly released his spiritual consciousness and rushed towards Sun Qinyang, spreading around with her as the center. However, nothing unusual was found until the surface of the sea. Sangu, what's wrong with you? Zuyun was confused, but he did not let down his guard. Instead, he landed next to Sun Qinyang and shouted into the dog's nose. Woof woof, woof woof. There was anxiety in Goza's voice, but Zuyun couldn't understand it at all. In desperation, it stretched out its legs and started digging up the sand underground. Zuyun was startled and said quickly, "You mean, there is something going on underground?" Sun Qinyang also opened her eyes and looked at the man and the dog in confusion. Woof woof woof. Dog Nose barked and nodded. Zuyun knew that Goza would not lie to him, so he immediately took out the flying boat and shouted, "Let's go." As soon as she finished speaking, Sun Qinyang jumped onto the flying boat. Zuyun picked up the dog's nose and threw it in. Then the flying boat soared into the sky. After flying to a certain height, Zuyun let the flying boat hover, and when he looked down from below, he truly had a panoramic view of the deserted island. This is. He was extremely shocked, but he didn't know how to describe it. Seeing this, Sun Qinyang also stuck her head out of the edge of the boat and exclaimed, "This looks like a turtle's back." Zuyun retracted his body and felt that his heart was about to jump to his throat. When he was on the island, he felt that the island was not big. But if this is a monster, it would be too scary. Moreover, even though he didn't take a closer look at those trees and green plants, he could still tell that they grew naturally. How many years has this monster lived? The most important thing is that I didn't even feel a trace of evil spirit at all. If the dog's nose hadn't suddenly reminded me, I would have died without knowing how I would have become the nourishment of this island. Zuyun was inexplicably horrified and forced himself to calm down. But in an instant, another question popped up in my mind. It took a long time before the dog's nose noticed something strange. In other words, he didn't smell the evil spirit, so how did he find out? Thinking of this, Zuyun quickly asked, "Sangu, how did you find out that this island is actually a monster?" Goza stood up and tilted his head. He was also anxious about how to explain to Zuyun. Sun Qinyang was on the side giving advice and said, "Dog Nose, did you smell the smell?" The dog's head shook, its nose stretched out its front paws, and it plucked one of its ears vigorously. Then it stood up again and patted its left chest with its paws with difficulty. "You said you heard the heartbeat of the monster." Seeing this action, Zuyun blurted out, "Woof woof." Seeing that Zuyun understood what he meant, Gaobi shouted happily. Sun Qinyang said with an incomprehensible expression, "Zuyun, the dog's nose has been listening for so long before he can hear the heartbeat of this monster. Either the monster is sleeping and its heart rate is extremely slow, or the monster is too big and its heart is separated from the heart a little further. But no matter what, we can't stay here for long, we can't deal with these monsters." Zuyun sighed. He never imagined that he would end up in danger after running so far. Fortunately, this monster seemed to have no intention of them, otherwise if it opened its mouth to devour them, it would not even be able to fit between its teeth. But then, he thought of another problem. I just don't have many spiritual stones on my body, so I have to use them sparingly. In desperation, Zuyun retracted the dog's nose, preparing to retract the flying boat and use the spiritual weapon to fly instead. You can at least supplement your own spiritual power by swallowing pills. But the flying boat can only be powered by spiritual stones. Or maybe it was Sun Qiniang who was consuming spiritual power during this period of pill formation. Just after putting away the spaceship, a sudden change occurred on the sea surface. The originally calm waters suddenly surged into huge waves. What followed was a shock to the island. Like the earth shattering, the rocky mountains on the island exploded. Stones of all sizes rolled down the beach, and some were directly shaken into the sea. Trees fell, fine sand splashed, and the island began to rise and fall. Suddenly, a high-pitched and dull roar sounded, as if coming from under the sea water. Immediately afterwards, a huge whirlpool formed on the sea surface. The two of them were horrified and wanted to escape from this place to avoid being affected. But the higher they fly, the more frightened they become. Under the whirlpool, a huge black shadow suddenly appeared, stirring back and forth. And that vortex was also generated because of this. What kind of creature is this? It has such power with every move it makes. Zuyun's voice became trembling. Sun Qiniang said, "Don't worry so much, just run for your life." Just when the two were about to fly away, the black shadow suddenly jumped out of the water. At the same time, all the sand on this side of the beach was lifted up, like a dust storm in the desert. This is actually the head of a monster. Zuyun cried out in fear, "This is a turtle." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 233. It is said that 1,000-year-old turtle lives for 10,000 years, and turtles have a long lifespan, and this is even more true after becoming a demon. It is actually a giant sea turtle. Sun Qiniang exclaimed, "When I was hanging around in the market in the early years, I often heard people say that there were huge monsters in the wild deep sea, and I don't know how many years they have lived. I didn't expect to meet one today." While speaking, the giant turtle seemed to have discovered the two people in the air. Compared with its head, the two eyes, which were as big as green beans, quickly stared at the two people. At the same time, the island has been completely destroyed, revealing a complete turtle back. Zuyun finally knew where the feeling he got from the island exploration came from. But more importantly, at this time, wherever the giant turtle's eyes go, the demon power also follows. If they hadn't flown high enough, they would have been smashed to pieces by this demon power. But just as they were afraid, the giant turtle's head suddenly turned back, and the pressure dissipated. Both of them breathed a sigh of relief, looked at each other, and felt something was wrong. At that moment, they all thought they were going to die. But they didn't expect that the giant turtle would let them go without any warning. The two had experienced the beast tide in the sea. Not to mention that the unintelligent monsters like to kill, the slightly intelligent ones just have more ideas of sneak attacks. I understand. At this time, Sun Qiniang suddenly clapped her hands and shouted. What do you understand? Zuyun asked hurriedly. The spiritual power of this giant turtle is so majestic and heavy, it must be due to its body. The bigger the body, the bigger the demon pill will be, and the more spiritual power will be. Isn't this common sense? Zuyun rolled his eyes. Logically speaking, after integrating Jian Tianming's hundreds of years of memory, his knowledge should not be limited to this. Listen to me. Sun Qiniang glared at him and said, "You and I only felt the demonic power of this giant turtle, but ignored its realm." You mean? Zhu Yun's eyes lit up and said, his realm is not higher than ours. Sun Qinyang immediately laughed and said, to be precise, it should not be higher than mine. Jian Tianming's memory told me that when a demon beast cultivates, it first cultivates a demon pill, and then condenses the pill, which is similar to the dantian of me and other human beings. If you can reach the transformation stage by practicing all the way, it is equivalent to my dantian stage. That means that this giant turtle is not sure to kill us, so it chooses. As he said, Zhu Yun looked at the giant turtle, and saw that under the turtle's back, 4 limbs and a tail had grown, and it had turned around and started swimming towards one place. Leave. Sun Qinyang pondered for a moment and said, Zhu Yun, this giant turtle is not very fast, how about, we follow it and see. Zhu Yun thought for a while and said, this may not be appropriate. Not to mention encountering Tang Zhuyang, even if we encounter other monsters, if we fight, such monster power will affect us, it will be terrible. What are you afraid of? Sun Qinyang's eyebrows curved, her eyes were like crescents, and she said, with me, a Jindan stage, here, I will naturally protect you. As for Tang Zhuyang, I'm afraid he won't dare to move when he sees the giant turtle coming. Tang Zhuyang came from Yazhu. It can be seen from his inability to swim that he has no understanding of the sea, let alone such a terrifying giant turtle in the sea. Even if he encounters it, I believe that with his cautious character, he will retreat. Zhu Yun thought about it. Since there is nowhere to go anyway, it might be a good idea to follow the giant turtle. Moreover, with it paving the way, some hidden dangers may be driven away, which is safer for them. In that case, let's follow and see. Zhu Yun swallowed a pill to replenish his spiritual power and agreed. The speed of the giant turtle gradually increased, but it was far less than the speed of the 2 people flying, which made Zhu Yun a lot more relaxed. The consumption of spiritual power was far less than the replenishment, and the spiritual power in the dantian began to slowly fill up. He also had time to think about what to do next. Are you thinking about Zhu Feng? Seeing that Zhu Yun seemed too silent, Sun Qinyang asked. Him. What is there for him to think about? It's okay if he doesn't respect me, after all, I don't know him. But he dared to kill his master. When he mentioned Zhu Feng, Zhu Yun's face darkened. He couldn't understand why he had such a character as Zhu Rong's son. Sun Qinyang said helplessly, maybe he was spoiled since childhood. When I left Huangshi Mountain, I left some gold and silver for your father. Maybe he doesn't need to live a hard life like you. With a different mind, he is naturally easily bewitched. You left it too. Zhu Yun was stunned. For him, it was good enough that Sun Qinyang didn't hate Zhu Rong, but she actually went to see him. Those things are useless to me. When I went to find you, I left some of them as an apology for my wrongdoing to him that year. Sun Qinyang shook her head and sighed, thinking in her heart that things in the world are really unpredictable. She obviously went to kill Zhu Rong for revenge, but it turned out that Zhu Rong made her mind suddenly clear, so she got out of that horn. Although her fate is still unfortunate, she has reached a height that she never thought of. Maybe that's it? Zhu Yun smiled bitterly and couldn't help but think of Mu Qingxin. She is also a spoiled person, who has not seen much of the world, is not firm in her mind, and is very easy to change. However, it seems that Tang Zhuyang didn't put him away when we escaped from the island. If something unexpected happens on the island, I'm afraid. Sun Qinyang did not speak. Zhu Yun thought that Sun Qinyang was afraid of irritating him, so he comforted him, it doesn't matter, you don't need to worry about it. People like these who kill teachers are ruthless and unjust. Maybe they will be a disaster if they stay in the world. Zhu Yun, look. Sun Qinyang didn't seem to hear Zhu Yun's words, but stretched out her hand and pointed far away. A familiar red color is slowly moving towards here. This is. Suddenly, Zhu Yun's pupils shrank, his face full of disbelief. The red dot is still far away, dozens of miles away from here. But he had obviously escaped for a long time. Even when he entered the sea, he went in the opposite direction and dived for more than 100 miles. Even if we go back the same way, we won't be able to return to this island so quickly. Also at this time, the giant turtle suddenly stretched its neck and raised its head, facing the red light. Zuyun was extremely shocked and murmured, "Sun Qiniang, do you think this giant turtle is heading towards that island?" Sun Qiniang was also completely distracted and said, "It's possible, maybe, that island has what this giant turtle needs for cultivation." Zuyun shook his head, as if talking to himself, and said, "I don't know what these monsters need to practice, but on that island, there is no magic medicine, no heavenly material or earthly treasure, the only thing worth fighting for it's a spiritual fire." Spirit fire. Sun Qiniang had visited the island in person, but she was knocked down, so she didn't pay attention to it. Now that I heard Zuyun say it, I was extremely surprised. Spiritual fire is naturally cultivated and may appear anywhere. But there is not even a spiritual medicine on that island, which is enough to show that spiritual power cannot be naturally condensed. How could such a spiritual thing be born? She raised her question and immediately woke up Zuyun. Yes, how can there be naturally formed spiritual fire in a place where even spiritual medicine cannot grow? That is to say, that island is not an island at all. Could it be that, like this giant turtle, it is also some kind of monster? Otherwise, how could it move like a giant turtle? Thinking of this, Zuyun became even more cautious. Originally, Zuyun was thinking of leaving, but when he thought of Tang Zhuyang, he couldn't help but worry about the Lingjian sect. Now that he is out of trouble, will he return to Lingjian sect and implicate others, such as Ergu, Mengwei? At this time, Sun Qiniang suddenly said in surprise, "Zuyun, look, this giant turtle has accelerated." Upon hearing this, Zuyun quickly looked down. The giant turtle that seemed to be drifting with the current began to swing its extremely thick limbs, and its speed suddenly increased. It looked like it was going to crash into the island. At the same time, demonic power was everywhere, stirring up huge waves again, layer after layer. At the same time, the sound of the huge waves spread dozens of miles away. On the platform on the mountainside of the island, Tang Zhuyang suddenly opened his eyes and was extremely surprised. How can there be such a big movement? It just so happens that this formation has not been fully understood yet, so why not take a look before talking about it? After that, he snorted coldly and flew straight up. I saw a gap at the top of the dark red formation, and Tang Zhuyang flew directly out of the gap and under the foot of the mountain. Zhu Feng was still in shock. After seeing Tang Zhuyang leaving, he quickly ran to the shore. He had a premonition. Such movement might destroy the formation, and then he would have a chance to escape. It's not just him. There were also several monks who forcibly restrained their greed at that time and did not rush into the mountains to fight for the burning sky flame, thus saving their lives. They are also scattered around the coast, just waiting for a good opportunity. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 234. Zuyun and Sun Qiniang stared at the sea. And the turbulent waves caused by the giant turtle had already alarmed the small island. Suddenly, the island stopped, and at the same time, they also saw a figure emerging from above. "It's Tang Zhuyang." The two said in unison. Even though they were prepared to meet again, they never expected that Tang Zhuyang would return to the island again. He must want to collect the spiritual fire, Zuyun said with certainty. Tang Zhuyang's original spiritual fire was swallowed up by Fen Tianyan when he was in the confused sword formation. And now that he has returned to the island, there is no doubt that it is for that spiritual fire. This island can move, so the spiritual fire must be something special. Sun Qinyang stared at Tang Zhuyang's figure and said in a deep voice. Zhu Yunchen believed that it must be extremely difficult to make the entire island move in the sea like a giant turtle. But Fen Tianyang kept saying eating is very strong. What does it mean? Eating means that it can eat this spiritual fire, so being strong means that this spiritual fire is very strong? No, not necessarily. Zhu Yun suddenly figured this out. If the spiritual fire was very strong, why did Fen Tianyang hit the transparent barrier like crazy? Does it mean that the barrier is strong, or that the island is strong? Zhu Yun squinted his eyes and suddenly had an idea in his mind. Regardless of whether the island is very strong or the barrier is very strong, in the face of the huge monster power of this giant turtle, maybe it is still an opportunity. But the premise is that Tang Zhuyang's trouble can be solved. But at this moment, Tang Zhuyang also spotted them floating in the air in the distance, and immediately flew over. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect you two to come back without fear of death. Shocked by the terror of the giant turtle, Tang Zhuyang did not dare to move rashly, and kept a certain distance from Zhu Yun and Sun Qinyang. Tang Zhuyang, I didn't expect you to dare to return to that island. Zhu Yun calmly flew forward a little, blocking Sun Qinyang's body. I held the talisman in my hand again. Sun Qinyang's heart warmed, and she wanted to let her block the front, but she saw Zhu Yun's other hand behind her back and made a gesture to her, telling her not to move rashly. Although she didn't understand where Zhu Yun had the courage to face Tang Zhuyang alone in his late stage of pill formation, Sun Qinyang's subconscious told her that Zhu Yun was worthy of trust. It's just a wild sea. There is no place that I, Tang Zhuyang, dare not go to. Tang Zhuyang was floating in the air, his hands behind his back, as if he had no intention of taking action. But in fact, his two hands each held a magic formula. If given the chance, would he let Zhu Yun go? The two sides remained in a stalemate, with no one moving. The sound of waves on the sea is still there, the island has stopped, but the speed of the giant turtle is getting faster and faster. Just when it was about to hit the island, the giant turtle suddenly retracted its head and limbs into its carapace. Boom! Finally, a loud noise rose into the sky. Along with the boundless huge waves, the blood-red formation shattered layer by layer, becoming even more exaggerated than before. It was as if the heaven and earth were shaken. The giant turtle remained motionless, but the island was knocked backwards. Tang Zhuyang's pupils shrank, feeling something bad. I don't know where this giant turtle came from, but it wants to hit this island. There was only one spiritual fire on that island, and the giant turtle was a marine monster, so why would it be interested in the spiritual fire? Could it be that this fire is extremely unusual? Let you go first. Tang Zhuyang was anxious. Spiritual fire was the most important part in his next practice. After being suppressed by the mysterious sword formation for several days, his realm dropped, and he wanted to cultivate back more than anyone else. An extraordinary spiritual fire helped him greatly. At the same time, he was afraid that if he attacked Zhu Yun, he might anger the giant turtle, so he simply turned around and rushed towards the island. The most important thing is, he thinks that such an impact from the giant turtle will also break the transparency restriction that he has been studying for a long time. If this is the case, then quickly conquer the spiritual fire and make plans. As he spoke, Tang Zhuyang rushed towards the island quickly. Because the bloody formation had been destroyed, Zhu Yun and the others clearly saw Tang Zhuyang landing on the platform on the mountainside. I also saw some monks taking the opportunity to flee crazily around the island. I didn't expect that so many people would refrain from going to the mountainside. Zhu Yun muttered to himself and was about to tell Sun Qinyang. When he went over to take a look, he suddenly saw a monk jumping into the sea. Among the fleeing crowd, he stood out. Now on the sea surface, the waves are rough, and there are giant turtles preparing for a second impact. Everyone escaped with their royal weapons, why would anyone rush into the sea? After just one glance, Zuyun suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. As soon as the monk jumped into the sea, a wave suddenly hit him. But after the wave passed, he was not affected at all. Just because he was sitting with a huge monster. Dragon-toothed beast. That's Zhao Kamang. Zuyun exclaimed in his heart and said to Sun Qiniang, you stay here and observe what's going on the island. If anything happens, help me warn you. I'll go take a look. After that, he quickly rushed towards the monk. I thought that Zhao Kamang was dead, but I didn't expect that he was still alive and well. Before getting the fragments of the secret realm, Zuyun naturally didn't care too much about Zhao Kamang's life and death. But now, Zhao Kamang surrenders to him, so naturally he cannot ignore death. Zuyun was extremely fast, flying close to the sea surface, nimbly dodging some huge waves, and rushed to a place not far in front of the monk in the blink of an eye. Who are you? Dare to block my, Qin Tianzu's way? Get out of here. Sitting on Zhao Kamang's back is the cave master of Siren Cave. While speaking, his right palm suddenly shot out. The situation is critical at this time, and he doesn't want to stay here. He will kill anyone who blocks his way. Seeing Qin Tianzu take action, Zuyun also had a stern look on his face. While Yu Jian dodged, he raised his right hand and Li Huo came out. Go. Li Huo rushed over in an instant, and the water mist raised around him was burned under the high temperature. Boy, using fire spells on the sea is really making people laugh. Qin Tianzu sneered, patted Zhao Kamang's back, and instantly dived under the sea. Li Huo immediately fell into the air. Into the water. Zuyun didn't hesitate and chased after him with his sword, but he also fell into the water. At the same time as he put away his sword, he immediately used the water escape technique. Qin Tianzu only felt a black shadow flash before his eyes, and Zuyun had already appeared beside him. He was immediately shocked. Who would have thought that a monk in the middle stage of foundation building could be more flexible in the water than he, a person who grew up in the sea? When he was about to defend against Zuyun's sneak attack, he saw Zuyun put his hand on Zhao Kamang's back. In an instant, countless bubbles appeared in front of his eyes, and Zhao Kamang disappeared without a trace. Boy, you actually just stole my monster. Qin Tianzu couldn't believe it, so he spoke directly and was given a mouthful of sea water. Zuyun had already obtained the water, so he ignored it at all. He used the water escape technique again, distanced himself from Qin Tianzu, and jumped back into the sky from the sea water. Boy, you are seeking death. Qin Tianzu was furious. Although he could fly with a weapon, his abilities were almost better than those of the siren. Even if he flies into the air, he is unlikely to be Zuyun's enemy. What's more, there is a terrifying Danjiji on the island, and there is also one on the other side of Zuyun. This is why, unlike other monks who escaped, he went in the opposite direction and rushed into the sea. Take away my siren, and I will make you suffer a terrible death. Thinking of this, Qin Tianzu's eyes flashed with a cruel look. He first protected his whole body, then collected his breath, and then gritted his teeth and swam towards the giant turtle. Among the 36 cave forces in the sea, no one knows the monsters in the sea better than them. He knew this giant turtle. He also knows how to be an envoy. Only. Facing such a huge demon power, he knew that he could not conquer it, but it was not a problem to make this giant turtle go crazy. Boom. At this time, the second impact of the giant turtle, here it comes. The island was knocked out a mile away again, and the sea surface was not flat, but one wave after another. Taking advantage of the cover of such a huge momentum, Qin Tianzu suddenly rushed over and used an enraging spell on the giant turtle. Ang ang ang. In an instant, the giant turtle's neck emerged from the shell, raised up into the sky, and let out the legendary roar of a dragon. Immediately afterwards, a red light representing madness appeared in those eyes, and the demonic power suddenly swept towards the surroundings. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 235. As soon as Zuyun flew back to Sun Qiniang's side, he was startled by the loud roar and broke into a cold sweat. This giant turtle is crazy. Sun Qiniang looked worried and said urgently, "Don't go to the island. The spiritual fire is certainly very strong, but if you go to the island again, you will die." Zuyun was also in shock, thinking that the giant turtle was just a monster with huge demonic power. I didn't expect it to be so huge. Even though they were high in the sky, they were affected by this demonic power. Not to mention that after the collision, Tang Zhuyang also stood up. He was so far away that he couldn't see his expression clearly, but he could also know that he was also very frightened at this time. No, Zuyun's eyes gradually became firm and he said, "If Tang Zhuyang is not eliminated, he will not be able to live in peace in the future. This giant turtle can obviously threaten his existence. Perhaps, this is a good opportunity." "Wish Yun." Sun Qiniang's voice suddenly raised a level, and said, "If you want to go, I will go with you. After all, I am also in the pill formation stage." Zuyun shook his head and said, "It is precisely because you are in the pill formation stage that you cannot go. When the monster goes crazy, it may have no reason and only instinct. The higher the realm, the more powerful and threatening it will feel." Zuyun's guess was correct. Although Qin Tianzu's method of controlling monsters could not control the giant turtle, it succeeded in irritating the giant turtle and making it lose part of its sanity. The reason why it hit the island was not for the spiritual fire, but to knock the island out of its original shape and swallow it. In its eyes, Tang Zhuyang was already an enemy that could steal the food from its mouth. The giant turtle roared in order to accumulate power, but now that the roar had stopped, it indicated that the accumulation of power had ended. Wow! Just as Zuyun and Sun Qiniang were arguing, the giant turtle moved. In the madness, the huge body of the giant turtle crashed towards the island like an arc reaching the sky. 1 mile away, here in a blink of an eye. And Tang Zhuyang was extremely horrified. He has lived for nearly 1,000 years and has killed many people, but he has killed even more monsters. But as Sun Qiniang guessed, Tang Zhuyang had never truly faced the wild sea. How did he know the horror of these giant beasts? In the flash of lightning, he had no time to escape, and the giant turtle's figure had already enlarged sharply in his pupils. Then, a roaring sound came from my ears. This island was actually knocked out of the sea by a giant turtle and was knocked away. Before he had time to recover, the giant turtle stretched its neck, and its scarlet eyes seemed like the red lanterns hanging under the eaves of his Zhuyang tower. As if a python pounced towards him, the giant turtle opened its bloody mouth and bit straight towards Tang Zhuyang. Tang Zhuyang was shocked and wanted to escape, but found that he was locked by boundless demonic power. Damn it! His eyes were about to burst, and he was running wildly with the spiritual power in his body, thus breaking free from the confinement of the demonic power. I saw that his figure was so strong that he grew several feet taller. Success! Before Tang Zhuyang could rejoice, the giant turtle slammed into the island and bit off half of his body. Ah! The pain came, and Tang Zhuyang roared heartbreakingly. Even though he was wandering in the Peepa realm and saw many nascent soul stage people, he had never suffered such a miserable situation. But this giant turtle actually destroyed his body. The giant turtle didn't expect Tang Zhuyang to escape from the trap. It originally wanted to swallow Tang Zhuyang in one bite. Only because it jumped up suddenly, it only bit off half of its body. The giant turtle quickly retracted its neck, and bit Tang Zhuyang's upper body like a spiritual snake coming out of its hole. "Sooner or later, I will swallow your flesh and blood and eat your soul." Tang Zhuyang roared loudly, and a golden light burst out from his mouth. The golden elixir escapes from the body. His body was instantly swallowed by the giant turtle, while Jin Dan fled in panic. The giant tortoise was not interested in the golden elixir at all. He chewed the already neat corpse a few times, spit it out into the distance, then raised its neck and slammed it onto the island. Boom! As far as the neck, a crack quickly appeared on the island. The turtle neck was raised again and fell down again. Every blow will expand the crack. The mountain peak in the center of the island also began to slowly collapse. This island will undoubtedly sink. However, at this moment, Zuyun focused all his attention on that golden light. Zuyun, cut the grass and roots. Before Zuyun could speak, Sun Qiniang was the first to rush out. Jian Tianming once escaped with his life by possessing the golden elixir, and returned to the elixir 500 years later. This memory could not be more profound for her. How could it be possible for Tang Zhuyang to escape and ascend to heaven? Sun Qiniang is right. If Tang Zhuyang escapes this time, it will cause serious trouble in the future. Even though there are countless methods during the pill formation stage, after leaving the body, the only thing left is brute force impact. Zuyun could use his chaos palm to smash Tang Zhuyang's golden elixir into powder. In an instant, he launched his flying boat and took out all the spirit stones. Enough. These spiritual stones were originally prepared just in case of escaping. Now, it is just used to chase Tang Zhuyang. I'm afraid Tang Zhuyang couldn't have imagined it. Together with the golden light, Zuyun quickly caught up with Sun Qiniang. He didn't let Sun Qiniang get on the flying boat together. Instead of chasing together, it is better for the two of them to outflank Tang Zhuyang. This way, there is a greater chance of intercepting Tang Zhuyang. Zuyun, I will take care of you. Sun Qiniang also knew what Zuyun was thinking, and said in a sweet voice. Zuyun understood, and the two of them distanced themselves tacitly, chasing after Tang Zhuyang on both sides. A moment later, he was speeding parallel to Tang Zhuyang. Boy, are you going to kill the fish and defeat the net? With the golden elixir being as big as a pill, Tang Zhuyang kept his speed while rising and falling to prevent being locked by Zuyun or Sun Qiniang's spiritual consciousness. He, Zuyun was sure of victory and said with an evil smile, the net will be broken, but the fish will not die. Seeing you look like you have never seen the world, let me let you die in the sea. With that said, Zuyun stretched out his hand to condense Li Huo. Boy, do you want to burn me with this fire technique? Tang Zhuyang's tone was disdainful. After all, he was once a person with spiritual fire, and he didn't even notice Li Huo. However, these words reminded Zuyunjin. That's right, if this fire doesn't work, then I'll change it to another kind of fire. Tang Zhuyang thought that Zuyun had no means to deal with him, and was secretly glad that he only needed to pay attention to Sun Qiniang. But he never thought that as soon as he turned his attention, another boundless fire arose on Zuyun's side. It's also a spiritual fire? Boy, is this my spiritual fire? Tang Zhuyang came back to his senses in fear, and he felt a familiar aura from this spirit. But when I took a closer look, I felt like I had fallen into an ice cellar. The spiritual fire in Zuyun's hand was completely different from his own. And the reason why I feel familiar is that this kid Zuyun has already had spiritual fire, and his level is not weaker than him, so that's why he swallowed his spiritual fire in the confused sword formation. If I had known this was the case, why would I have gone to the island? He must be willing to kill Zuyun at all costs first. But by this time, it was completely too late. Fen Tianyan, go. Spiritual fire has natural restraint against this kind of golden elixir that has no physical protection. Fen Tianyan left his hand, quickly transformed into a human form, and headed towards Tang Zhuyang's golden elixir package. Tang Zhuyang, who originally thought he could escape because of the flexibility of the golden elixir, finally experienced firsthand what it was like to escape death. Fen Tianyan has no fixed form. After Zuyun gave it instructions, it quickly transformed into a form, like a fire net, covering Tang Zhuyang. Boy, you have to die. Tang Zhuyang screamed angrily, but Zhu Yun knew that this was his last cry. As soon as he finished speaking, Fen Tianyan had completely engulfed Tang Zhuyang. Stab it! A burning smell quickly spread in the air. Zhu Yun stopped the flying boat, and Sun Qiniang also flew over. She didn't take action not just to wait and see, but because Zhu Yun took action decisively and quickly. She was still thinking about what method to use, and the golden elixir was burned. Zhu Yun, you are so fast. Sun Qiniang covered her nose and frowned. It seems that the smell here is not pleasant. Tang Zhuyang was still careless and looked down on me too much. After communicating with Fen Tianyan, Zhu Yun learned that the golden elixir had been completely burned. He explained with a smile and took back Fen Tianyan. Who would have thought that Tang Zhuyang, who could single-handedly support a sect in a place like Yaezhu, would die without even a scum left? Sun Qiniang couldn't help but feel extremely sad. I don't know if Zhu Yun is too lucky. Or Tang Zhuyang did all the bad things, defeated his so-called immortal fate, and finally ended up in a situation where he was dead. At this time, Fen Tianyan suddenly uttered human words. Eat, delicious, eat, delicious. Zhu Yun was stunned for a moment, then his face showed a look of ecstasy. From being so strong before, to being delicious? So the implication is that it can swallow the spiritual fire on the island. He quickly turned around and looked in the direction of the original island, and the expression on his face suddenly froze again. The giant turtle seemed to be dying, floating motionless on the sea surface, and the island was nowhere to be found and no longer existed. Except for some grass and broken trees floating on the sea surface, Zhu Yun almost thought that the island disappeared out of thin air. What about the island? What about the fire? Zhu Yun muttered to himself. Sun Qiniang suddenly landed on the flying boat and said urgently to Zhu Yun, look, there is a red light in the gap between the giant turtle's mouth. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 236. After hearing what Sun Qiniang said, Zhu Yun immediately looked into the giant turtle's mouth. Sure enough. In the gap of the mouth that was not completely closed, not only was there a red light flashing, but there was also a faint flickering of fire. Is it that spiritual fire? Zhu Yun frowned, and felt something was wrong. First of all, a giant turtle, a sea monster, has grown for so many years. Even if its intelligence is low, it is impossible to swallow the spiritual fire. This attribute itself does not match. Secondly, after the giant turtle bit Tang Zhuyang's body, it smashed the island crazily. And the spiritual fire is at the top of the mountain. Sun Qiniang, you stay here, I'll go down and take a look. Zhu Yun saw that the red light in the giant turtle's eyes faded, and it was even a little demented. Thinking of the madness just now, he felt that it should be safe at this time. Zhu Yun, be careful. Sun Qiniang knew Zhu Yun's temper. She could not change her mind about what he decided, so she could only say so. Well, the flying boat is controlled by you, don't use spirit stones anymore. After saying this easily, Zhu Yun jumped off the flying boat. When he was about to crash into the sea, he thought and Zhao Kamang suddenly appeared beside him. Let's go and have a look. Although Zhu Yun's water escape technique is infinitely useful in the sea, he still can't control the distance as he pleases. So riding Zhao Kamang, the sea monster, is the most appropriate choice. Roar. Zhao Kamang roared, feeling a lot of emotion in his heart. After being taken away by Qin Tianzu, he became a monster controlled by him. Zhao Kamang thought he had no chance of freedom, but he never thought that Zhu Yun would come to save him the moment he saw him. If he was previously subject to the suppression of Zhu Yun's ranch space, then his submission now is a thought from the heart. The Jiaya beast is originally a sea monster. Now that the sea is calm, Zhao Kamang can ride the wind and waves. When they were only half a mile away from the giant turtle's mouth, Zhu Yun signaled Zhao Kamang to stop, and then said, "You go back first, I'll go see for myself." Roar. Zhao Kamang said that he wanted to follow to show his heart to protect his master. But Zhu Yun didn't give him a chance to show off. He put his hand on his shoulder and took him back in an instant. The next moment, Zhao Kamang appeared in the big lake of the ranch. Woof woof. The barking of the dog nose was a little mocking, as if to say that he was just a little while away, and it was over. Zhao Kamang responded with a low roar, and controlled the lake to raise a wave and smashed it towards the shore. Instantly, the dog nose was soaked all over, like a drowned dog. One demon beast, one spirit beast. Both have human intelligence, but I don't know why they have such childish behavior. On the sea. Zhu Yun silently recited the water escape formula, completely blending his body into the sea water, and then slowly swam towards the giant turtle's mouth. But the closer he got, the more frightened he became. Because the giant turtle's jaw was just level with the sea water, he could clearly see a ball of fire. To be precise, it was a ball of spiritual fire trapped in the red light. The spiritual fire swayed, as if trying to break free from the red light. But it was simply doing useless work. Not to mention letting the red light like a round bead roll out of the giant turtle's mouth, not even a sound or temperature could be emitted. Even the spiritual fire can be trapped, the round ball seems to be very unusual. Zhu Yun thought of the time when he first arrived at the island. Wasn't the formation that trapped all the cultivators in it also this color? Even later, when the spiritual fire wanted to trap him and Tang Zhuyang again, it was also this dark red. It's just not so transparent. As he got closer and closer to the giant turtle's mouth, Zhu Yun became more frightened. It wasn't that he felt the danger, but it was too quiet, which made him feel this way. When Zhu Yun first embarked on the immortal path, he suffered a lot. This made him a little too cautious at this time. But on the immortal path, it is better to be careful. After just a moment of thinking, Zhu Yun decided to get closer and take a look. Fortune and wealth are sought in danger, not to mention that he has made full preparations. Thinking of this, Zhu Yun kept leaning to the mouth of the giant turtle. When he saw the true appearance of the fire, his breath suddenly stagnated. The giant turtle was not unable to close its mouth. But the small ball that trapped the spiritual fire just stuck to the giant turtle's upper and lower teeth. How to take it out? Even if the giant turtle was unconscious at this time, this huge mouth as big as a room, how could he guarantee that he could escape from it when taking out the bead? Otherwise, kill the giant turtle first? With this thought, Zhu Yun himself was shocked. Even though he was not familiar with monsters, he knew that the older and larger the monsters were, the more amazing their own defense would be. Especially for a species like the giant turtle, which is already wearing armor. Looking closely, the giant turtle's scales are extremely thick, and he can't even guarantee that his chaos palm, which he hits with all his strength, can tickle him. After all, Tang Zhuyang, who was in the late stage of the linking pill, was bitten off in one bite. Unfortunately, Tang Zhuyang's body was not eaten, and no one knew where his storage bag was spit out. Zhu Yun retracted his mind and decided to just try it without alarming the giant turtle. If it doesn't work, no matter how mysterious the treasure of the trapped spirit fire is, he can only make another plan or even give up. I hope this turtle's mouth is thicker. Zhu Yun murmured softly, supported the wrinkles around the giant turtle's mouth, and gently climbed up. In order to avoid waking up the giant turtle, he didn't even dare to use his spiritual power. Although he has taken countless body-shaping pills, Zhu Yun does not think that his body will be stronger than Tang Zhuyang. After breaking away from the sea water and standing firmly on the edge of the giant turtle's mouth, Zhu Yun reached out and touched the bead. In his mind, Fen Tianyan, who was supposed to appear, quietly disappeared. Zuyun felt strange secretly, wondering if Fen Tianyan was also afraid of the speed, afraid of being taken into it. Maybe it was shouting so loudly before, and it was talking about the speed, right? There was an inexplicable feeling in his hand. Zuyun felt a little familiar, but for a while, he couldn't remember it. It's strange. I have never had any magic weapon. Why is it like this? Forget it, don't care, let's put it in the Dewu glazed mirror first. He no longer struggled, and immediately thought about it. The beads disappeared instantly, and the giant turtle's big mouth suddenly closed. Bang! As the giant mouth closed, two rows of hard and huge teeth collided together, making a loud noise. The giant turtle's eyes suddenly opened. I don't know if it was the sound of teeth clashing that woke it up, or the sudden toothache that woke it up. Zuyun didn't have time to think about this. Once he got the beads, he should leave as soon as he should. He immediately used the water escape technique and escaped far away without caring about the loss of spiritual power in his body. Such a giant beast, the closer it gets, the more dangerous it becomes. Ang ang ang. Sure enough, after a while, the giant turtle gradually regained consciousness. The pearl in its mouth was taken away, how could it not be angry? This is a good thing that can save it tens of thousands of years of cultivation. Suddenly, the sea became rough again, extremely crazy. But as quickly as it comes, it can go as quickly as it comes. The giant turtle's demon elixir was already exhausted. It was at this moment of loss that he recovered a little. Just a moment later, the sea surface became silent again. The giant turtle, with an unwilling look on its face, slowly closed its eyes and at the same time retracted its limbs, head, and tail into its back shell. It looks like he's about to take a breath again. Sun Qiniang, who was on the flying boat, could see everything clearly. I also breathed a long sigh of relief. If she hadn't seen Zuyun escape with her own eyes, she would definitely have fought the giant turtle. It's just that I don't know where Zuyun is fleeing to now, so I don't dare to fly around and search randomly. He was afraid that he would fly in the wrong direction and get further and further away from Zuyun. Or maybe Zuyun floated up from a distance, but couldn't find himself when he came here again. In fact, Zuyun did have such a plan. After getting away from the giant turtle, he would leave the sea to find Sun Qiniang. The sky above the sea is unobstructed. As long as Sun Qiniang doesn't leave, he only needs to take a general direction to meet him. However, before that, Zuyun decided to go inside the Dewu glass mirror to see what kind of treasure it was. After getting away from the giant turtle, he fled towards the bottom of the sea. After the surroundings fell into darkness, he made a thought and entered the Dewu glazed mirror. After observing the cave, there was no red light in it, so he simply walked towards the outside of the cave. Just when he came out of the cave, he saw an extremely shocking scene. I saw that the cauldron that I had placed in the open space to warm the burning sky flame was glowing with a familiar dark red light. Could it be that the familiar feeling before came from the furnace? Is this treasure integrated with the furnace? I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 237. By the way, why is Fen Tianyan silent? Zuyun, who was staring at the furnace in a daze, suddenly realized that it was different from usual. As long as he was in the Dae glazed mirror, Fen Tianyan didn't want to stay under his Taoist platform at all. And it had been clamoring to eat the spiritual fire before, but now it was completely silent. Strange. Zuyun muttered silently in his heart, and Fen Tianyan immediately jumped between his palms. Aren't you going to bed? Seeing that Fen Tianyan seemed to be trying to dodge the furnace, Zuyun couldn't help but frown and asked. There is no doubt that such a change was naturally caused by the bead. In fact, he was absolutely sure that when it said it was so powerful before, it was also referring to this bead. Could it be that this bead would also trap Fen Tianyan in it? With what he was thinking about, Zuyun took a step forward, getting closer to the furnace cauldron. Unexpectedly, Fen Tianyan jumped to the ground hastily as if he had seen a ghost, for fear that Zuyun was going to harm him. "Okay, if you don't dare to go there, then stay away from me," Zuyun said helplessly, thinking that when he snatched the bead from the giant turtle's mouth, he didn't notice any danger at all, so the bead must have no restrained effect on him. All you need to do is guard against the spiritual fire in it. This spiritual fire is obviously not low in intelligence. He can use strategies and play with people's hearts. But in this Diwu glass mirror, you have to lie down if it's a dragon, and you have to curl up if it's a tiger. After thinking about it, Zuyun still kept an eye on it. There was no protection in the open space. He simply moved the cauldron to the alchemy room, and Zuyun temporarily put away the original cauldron. Look now. The alchemy room is covered by a formation and will not trap him. If something unexpected happened, he would be able to escape in time. He leaned against the edge of the door and used his spiritual power to lift the lid of the cauldron through the air. As the gap grew larger, the beads seemed to bloom with red light and began to burst out. But until the entire furnace lid was opened, nothing unusual happened. Zuyun picked up his energy and walked towards the furnace. This cauldron was one size smaller than an ordinary mid-level cauldron. The height only reached his neck. Zuyun only had to lean forward slightly to see the inside of the cauldron. The beads are still beads, still the same size. The spiritual fire inside is still spiritual fire. It's just that due to the size of the beads, it is much smaller than ordinary spiritual fire. He looked at the beads carefully again and couldn't help but be stunned. This spiritual fire seemed to be in great pain and was constantly struggling. Sometimes, a human face appears with angry eyes. Sometimes it turns into a human form, lying flat and twisting back and forth. It's strange. Could this bead be a treasure for refining spiritual fire? Zuyun was extremely confused, but racking his brains he couldn't think of a reason. But it was certain that this bead was obviously harmless to him, so he simply waved his hand, took the bead out of the air, and held it between his palms. The beads were extremely round and red, and streams of warmth penetrated into his body along his meridians. This feeling was very comfortable, and Zuyun couldn't help but breathe out slightly, as if his whole body had become a little more energetic. However, his thoughts remained unaffected. No wonder the giant turtle also wants the speed. Just holding it in his hand can increase his strength. My ordinary body has already benefited a lot. If the giant turtle swallows it, it will definitely undergo earth-shaking changes. Etc. Swallow. The giant turtle's intelligence is naturally inferior to his own, but the instinct of monsters to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages is beyond his comparison. A monster like it, which has lived for who knows how many years, wants to swallow this bead. What if it swallows the bead itself? As the thoughts came together, Zuyun began to make calculations in his mind. Beads are beneficial and harmless, but what about the spiritual fire in them? Will it end up entrenched in my own body? By the way, how about collecting Fen Tianyan into his dantian first? When he was on the island, Fen Tianyan was never afraid, but after the beads entered the furnace, as long as the two are separated, it must be it's okay. Thinking of this, Zuyun rushed out of the alchemy room with beads in hand, and with a casual move, he took Fen Tianyan back into his dantian. Fen Tianyan, if you can guard your dantian well, the benefits will be yours. Zuyun murmured, and then swallowed the beads directly into his mouth. The warmth goes down the throat and reaches the lower abdomen. Zuyun controls the spiritual power and wants to use the characteristics of chaotic spiritual power to completely integrate the bead. But who would have known that a change would occur at this moment? Before the spiritual power arrived, the beads had already moved. It was obviously in the lower abdomen, but it was as if it was nothing, passing directly through the organs and rushing towards the left chest. The spiritual power in the Danshan is not slow, but it needs to come through the meridians, so it is impossible to catch up. Zuyun was horrified. In the flash of lightning, before he could react, he saw the bead rushing into his heart. Bang bang. Suddenly, my heart beat powerfully. Zuyun's heart tightened, but he found that apart from becoming stronger, he didn't seem to have any discomfort. Could it be the speed? In doubt. The beating power of the heart has increased slightly. Bang bang. But at this time, Zuyun's spiritual power reached its peak and wrapped around his heart. Stop. Feeling that there was no surprise, Zuyun controlled the chasing spiritual power and returned to his Danshan. Instead, he communicated with Fen Tianyan and made him come here. He was afraid that if the beads merged with his body, the spiritual fire would escape and burn his heart. Eat, delicious. As he got closer to his heart, Fen Tianyan spoke human words again, and this voice sounded in Zuyun's mind. My guess is correct, Zuyun said in his heart. Fen Tianyan is afraid of the relationship between the bead and the furnace cauldron. Now that the two are separated, they can no longer threaten Fen Tianyan. I don't know, this what are beads? After letting Fen Tianyan wait outside the heart, Zuyun poured his spiritual consciousness into the heart. For an instant, he seemed to be in a whole new world. In the heart, the red glow flourished. He felt like he was in a sea of blood, and he couldn't tell whether it was the color of blood or the red light of the beads. But his heart was under consciousness, and he could see extremely clearly, and he quickly found the bead. To his surprise, the red light of the beads was slowly merging with the blood. Not good. Zuyun was stunned for a moment and then reacted immediately. If the red light is not there, I am afraid that the spiritual fire will escape. He is only in the foundation building stage. If his heart is destroyed, he will still die. Fen Tianyan, come quickly. Zuyun shouted in shock, and Fen Tianyan immediately rushed into his heart. At the same time, the bead's red light disappeared, and an extremely high temperature suddenly emerged. Am I going to die? Zuyun wailed in pain. His heart felt like he was in a sea of fire. For a moment, he was a little distracted. But soon, this feeling disappeared. He immediately came back to his senses and saw that Fen Tianyan had completely wrapped the spiritual fire. Delicious, delicious. Fen Tianyan's voice sounded again in Zi Mansion. But this time, he could feel the joy in it. Is this okay? When Zuyun saw that the spiritual fire had almost no resistance, he returned his consciousness to his body with lingering fear. He slowly opened his eyes and found that his hands were holding his heart. It's really too dangerous. There were big beads of sweat on his forehead. Zuyun stretched out his hand to wipe it away, and then sat directly on the ground. His heart was still beating powerfully, and with every beat, Zuyun could feel his physical strength increasing. But the beads are indeed useful, Zuyun said to himself, and couldn't help but feel a little happy in his heart. It is true that no matter how strong the body is in the foundation building stage, its effect is limited. But after reaching the elixir formation stage, it will surely have rare and wonderful uses. At least, if he faced a monster like a giant turtle again, he wouldn't be beaten in two pieces like Tang Zhuyang. In other words, life will be harder in the future. Feeling the gradually surging power in his body, Zuyun sank his consciousness into his heart again. Just as it happened, Fen Tianyan had also swallowed up all the spiritual fire. Zuyun could also feel that Fen Tianyan had strengthened a bit again, and at the same time he had gained all the memories of this spiritual fire. Just when he was about to let Fen Tianyan return to the Taoist platform, another sudden change occurred. As soon as Fen Tianyan changed back to the flame form, he rushed into the bead uncontrollably. Not good. Zuyun was shocked, but it was already too late. Fen Tianyan disappeared without a trace, as if he had never appeared before. Only the bead, embedded in the heart, remained motionless. Zuyun was stunned. Could it be that Fen Tianyan was also trapped by the speed? Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 238. Seeing that there was no abnormality in his heart, no matter how unwilling Zuyun felt, he could only withdraw his consciousness temporarily. Feeling the strong beating in his heart, his face was full of doubts. How about giving it a try? Now that he could only treat a dead horse as a living horse, Zuyun could only try to shout, "Feng Tianyan, come out." Instantly, there was a familiar heat in my heart. As soon as the joy spread to Zuyun's face, Fen Tianyan emerged from his palm. The flames flickered, it was still the burning sky flame. "Aren't you trapped?" Zuyun asked in surprise. Fen Tianyan tilted his head, as if he was understanding the meaning of Zuyun's words. After a while, he nodded. "Go back." Seeing this, Zuyun gave another order, and Fen Tianyan retracted directly from his palm. He quickly released his spiritual consciousness to follow, and saw Fen Tianyan getting back into the bead along the way. It's amazing. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Zuyun would never have imagined that this bead could allow Fen Tianyan to move in and out freely without any abnormalities on his body. In other words, no matter how powerful a monk you meet in the future, even if you explore his danshan, you will not be able to find out that he is carrying heavenly fire. "Come out!" Zuyun shouted again, and Fen Tianyan once again emerged from the beads and jumped onto the palm of his hand. It just turned into a human form and danced, seeming to express its dissatisfaction with Zuyun. Also, with a little intelligence, it sensed Zuyun's playfulness. "It seems that my intelligence has improved a bit." Zuyun murmured, instead of having such laborious communication with Fen Tianyan, it would be better to experience it for himself. He quickly immersed his mind in Zifu and began to read Fen Tianyan's memory. Originally, Fen Tianyan only had his own name in his memory, and Zuyun didn't know much about it. But at this time, there may be unexpected gains. After forming a connection with Fen Tianyan's spiritual intelligence, Zuyun's expression gradually became surprised. I don't know how long it took before Zuyun came to his senses in a daze and carefully digested the information he got from Fen Tianyan. It turns out that this bead is a fire element treasure, the fire spirit bead. The reason why this pearl exists in the sea is that thousands of years ago, a powerful senior named Yayong threw it here. As for how powerful the senior is, there is no more information in the memory that Fen Tianyan devoured. But Zuyun knew that he didn't take such a treasure seriously, which was enough to show how powerful the senior was. This fire was originally Chezhu's ground fire. Even it didn't know why it offended Yayong, and then it was absorbed into it by the fire spirit bead that Yayong took out casually. When he arrived at the wild sea, Yayong suddenly remembered it and threw it into the sea. Zuyun couldn't help but feel envious. De Neng was indeed De Neng. He was so casual. The fire spirit bead was just thrown into the sea. The subsequent information has nothing to do with Yayong. Earth fire tried its best to escape from the trouble. Thousands of years later, Earth fire's wisdom gradually grew, and it also found some ways to control the fire spirit orb. It's just extremely limited, and it itself cannot leave the center of the fire spirit pearl. Unless the transparent barrier is broken. In addition to escaping from the fire spirit pearl, Earth Fire's purpose was to return to Chezhu to practice. Its method of cultivation is simply to enter the earth veins and swallow the fire spirit power of underground magma, thereby unifying the Chezhu fire veins. This information made Zuyun feel happy. It just so happens that I also want to go to Chezhu, why not let Fen Tianyan try the underground fire? He had long known that there were cracks in the ground in Chezhu, and magma would erupt from time to time. After receiving all the information, Zuyun slowly opened his eyes. Right now, for him, he has gained a lot. But the only unanswered question is why the fire pearl is hidden in the heart. Is there anything that can't be said? After shaking his head and suppressing this thought in his heart, Zuyun continued to walk into the alchemy room. Looking at the familiar alchemy furnace, Fen Tianyan was called out again. Fen Tianyan looked at the cauldron and knew that Zuyun meant to let him sleep under the cauldron. But this time, Fen Tianyan refused. Zuyun no longer forced himself and let Fen Tianyan return to the fire spirit pearl. He already understood that the fire spirit pearl might be of greater help to Fen Tianyan. In other words, this furnace is temporarily useless to me. Let's go see Gaobi and Zhao Kamang. I don't know if they will fight. Zuyun chuckled and entered the pasture. As soon as he reached the hill beside the lake, he was immediately dumbfounded. I saw a dog and a demon, fighting together. Not far away, two horses seemed to be watching with great interest, and even their little brown eyes revealed a human look. Zhao Kamang used his huge body to run rampant, and from time to time he would growl and summon the spiritual spring in the lake to slap the dog on the nose. In addition to its flexible body, the dog's nose can only bark a few words as a counterattack. Zuyun reached out and touched his forehead. Stop it, can you all transform? After a moment, Zuyun shouted. Zhao Kamang and Gaobi stopped immediately. These words simply spoke to their weakness. Only by reshaping the dog's nose can the longevity be increased. Zhao Kamang was originally in human form, so naturally he wanted to change back into a human again. Zuyun stepped forward and first cursed into the dog's nose, I finally rescued you, why don't you take good care of yourself and stay here? Woo-oh. The dog's nose felt a little aggrieved, and he whimpered a few times, trying to explain. He wanted to say that it was Zhao Kamang who mocked him first, but unfortunately he couldn't say it at all, and he suddenly felt even more aggrieved. Beside, Zhao Kamang also roared when he heard the dog snort. Shut up. Zuyun glared and the roar suddenly stopped. The same goes for you. I risked my life to bring you back here. Why, do you think it's better not to be a human being? Zhao Kamang was extremely anxious. He was in almost the same situation as Gaobi. They all have human intelligence, but suffer from the inability to speak. Suddenly, as if Zhao Kamang remembered something, he managed to write a few big characters on the wetland by the lake with the tip of a claw. The old dog said, I'm a she-male. Seeing the words that were crooked and crooked, like crabs running rampant, Zuyun couldn't help laughing and said with a smile, Sangu is right. You were originally a human, but now you are a monster. It is not wrong to call him a human monster. Of course, he was originally a monster. If the demon turns into a human later, you can call him a demon. In this way, you two will be even. After all, Zuyun felt extremely helpless. He had lived a long time and was not stable at all. They also kept arguing like children of several years old. Just as he was shaking his head, the dog next to him barked again. Zhao Kamang was furious and wrote on the ground again. Zuyun looked over. The old dog threatens me. Suddenly, Zuyun reacted and screamed, can you understand the meaning of the three dogs' calls? Zhao Kamang nodded repeatedly and wrote another sentence. He keeps scolding me. Zuyun's face darkened, he patted Zhao Kamang's back and said, slowly write down his charges here, and I'll teach him a lesson. There is no way, Zhao Kamang writes too slowly. It was indeed a bit difficult for him to use his one-finger meditation with his huge body. But the good thing is, finally there is a way to communicate with these two people. Come over. Zuyun glared at the dog's nose, asked him to roll over to the other side of the short hill with him, sat down casually, and said, Sangu, you and Zhao Kamang are old acquaintances at least, and now they all recognize me as their master. If it happens again, if you hit me, you won't take me seriously, right? He put on a big hat as soon as he opened his mouth, and the dog nose shrank his neck, vaguely understanding what Zuyun meant. Let's forget about the past. In this way, if you really have nothing to do, learn to write from Zhao Kamang, so as not to keep arguing every day. Save it in the future. If I ask you something, I will have to find Zhao Kamang and delay the matter. Don't worry, I treat you all equally. I also want to transform you into a human form as soon as possible. From now on, you two will be my helpers on my journey to immortality. Hearing these kind words, Goze felt very good, so he lay down and listened quietly to Zuyun's plan to go to Chuzhu. After talking for a while, Zuyun touched the dog's head, and then stood on the top of the short hill. Zhao Kamang was still writing, but still writing very slowly. In just half an hour, I only listed 3 or 4 items. Zuyun chuckled lightly and shouted to Zhao Kamang, "Okay, there's no need to write. You two just get along well." Just as he was about to leave, Zuyun suddenly remembered something and quickly said to Zhao Kamang, "You are from Chuzhu, have you ever heard of the Demon Refining Tower? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 239. This is one of the few pieces of information Zuyun knows about Chuzhu. He now speculates that the skeleton is most likely the leader of the demon control sect that Li Daqin mentioned, who caused a great disturbance in Chuzhu back then. Since Zhao Kamang has practiced the 10,000 demons art, he might also know about this. The Demon Refining Tower is where the demon control sect is located. If you find the Demon Refining Tower, you can find the demon control sect. Zuyun just looked at Zhao Kamang until he nodded. Is there something unspeakable that made you hesitate for so long? He wanted to ask, but he felt that Zhao Kamang wrote too slowly. With his writing speed, it would take him 10 days or half a month to write this kind of question clearly. So, let him write it before planning to go to Chuzhu. Zuyun stopped struggling and left the ranch. Only Zhao Kamang, whose face suddenly dimmed, was left lying by the lake, and no one knew what he was thinking. Zuyun sat on the open space beside the medicine garden and continued to digest the information about the fire spirit pearl. As a treasure of the fire system, if it only has the function of placing spiritual fire, it would be too useless. Just like the spiritual beads of other systems. The water spiritual bead collects water, the earth spiritual bead collects earth, the wood spiritual bead collects wood. What about the gold spiritual bead? Collect gold? Thinking of this, Zuyun couldn't help laughing. Shaking his head, he put this meaningless question behind him and began to unravel the memory obtained by burning sky flame. It took a long time for the earth fire to be thrown into the wild sea after the great Yayong collected it into the fire spiritual bead. In other words, the fire spiritual bead was not used much, and it was not absorbed into the heart like Zuyun is now. To be precise, it should be more appropriate to merge. Is it the characteristic of the fire spiritual bead? When it was still an island, the fire spiritual bead would absorb the flesh and blood of those dead monks. The earth fire is transformed into spiritual power through these flesh and blood for his use. Spiritual fire can refine everything. Not to mention that the flesh and blood of cultivators have spiritual power. In addition, there is no living creature in the sea area within 1,000 miles. It is also controlled by this spiritual fire with limited power. It was used to break the formation that originally trapped the entire fire spirit pearl. Even the world of the fire spirit pearl can move freely in the sea in the form of an island. It seems that the spiritual fire has limited power. Like the burning sky flame, it is trapped in a transparent restriction and cannot be broken. And what caused countless cultivators to fight at that time was that the burning sky flame was colliding with the restriction like crazy. Suddenly, Zuyun felt that the scene was somewhat familiar. At the beginning, when Burning Skyflame and himself met for the first time in the alchemy room, it collided with the transparent restriction like this. He subconsciously turned his head and looked at the alchemy room. Could it be that this is the same kind of restriction? It's not such a coincidence, right? The Dao glass mirror is undoubtedly a fairy treasure. If Yang is an immortal, how could he still be in this wild sea? This doesn't make sense at all. It must be a coincidence. Zuyun laughed again. Although he was not very knowledgeable, he knew that in the entire Ya realm, the strongest state was only at the peak of the late Jindan stage. Whenever there was a sign of a breakthrough, they would go to the Peepa realm. The spiritual power there was more concentrated. Not to mention that the success rate of the breakthrough was higher, even the strength after the breakthrough would be stronger than in the Ya realm. Shaking his head, Zuyun retracted his thoughts and continued to think about the wonderful use of the fire spirit pearl. The fire spirit pearl sucked the flesh and blood of living creatures, and everything was done by the earth fire. Then, after killing someone, could he also use the fire spirit pearl to turn the corpse into spiritual power for his own use? If so, there would be one more way to replenish spiritual power in the future. It is much more convenient than swallowing pills, using spirit stones or refining qi to recover. There are countless living creatures in the world. This spiritual fire can kill creatures thousands of miles away from the sea with the fire spirit pearl and absorb spiritual power for its own use. Born as a human, I have a higher level of intelligence and can have more strategies to fight and support the war, so as to enter the Tao by killing. Swoosh. 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 At this time, a series of subtle and short wind sounds suddenly came from my ears, and Zuyun immediately raised his head. Just in time to see a group of spiritual medicines, as if they were greatly frightened, hiding in the pits of the medicine garden. This is. He looked confused, and then suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. On his forehead, these cold sweats gathered into bean-sized cold sweat beads, sliding down his cheeks and dripping onto the ground. In the air, the murderous aura gradually dissipated. I actually had this idea. He said to himself, full of fear. I cultivate immortality to pursue immortality, using my own way to pursue immortality, not killing. As soon as these words came out, the murderous aura suddenly dissipated, and Zuyun could not see the red light in his eyes fade away. But he knew that at that moment, he almost went crazy. So, this is, the inner demon? He touched his chest, wondering what caused this inner demon. Was it the fire spirit pearl? He thought not. He raised his head again, secretly rejoicing. Just now, these spiritual medicines may have seen that he was immersed in his mind, so they came over to watch the fun like before. Who knew that he suddenly had a murderous aura, and scared them away? It was the sound of the wind that woke him up from his possessed mentality. Knowing the cause and effect, Zuyun's eyes became softer when he looked at the elixirs. At the same time, I also began to reflect on the fact that during this period of time, I seemed to be killing a little too much. Chuzhu and his party, please slow down appropriately. Now that there is no crisis for the time being, go back and check on Menguia. If there is no serious problem, just start practicing and get rid of the inner demons as much as possible. Otherwise, help her find the elixir of immortality. If you encounter someone who seizes the treasure, there will inevitably be another fight. After Zuyun made his decision, he let out a sigh of relief and then stepped away from the Dawu glazed mirror. Half an hour later, Zuyun rushed out of the sea. He looked around and immediately spotted the golden light of the flying boat in the sky. Landing safely on the flying boat, Sun Qiniang smiled like a flower. Let's go back to Lingjian sect. Zuyun and Sun Qiniang didn't know that a childish face appeared under the sea hundreds of miles to the west of the sea. It was so dangerous. I almost died from the giant turtle's mouth. It is Zhu Feng. After the formation outside Huilingzhu Island was broken, he took advantage of the chaos and jumped into the sea. If you stay on the island, you will die, so why not fight for it? Zhu Feng didn't have much hope of escaping with the help of the magic weapon he looted from Moxie. Who would have expected that Zhu Feng was so lucky that even Tang Zhuyang's body that was thrown out ended up somewhere else? He would not let go of the storage bag in the pill formation stage. He got many spiritual stones from it, which made him feel confident. Zhu Feng was one of the only two people who jumped into the sea at that time. The other person is, of course, Qin Tianzu. It was him who attracted Zhu Yun's attention, allowing Zhu Feng to escape from the other side. Qin Tianzu did the opposite, but Zhu Feng really couldn't fly. There was no choice but to jump into the sea. He was already strong-minded, but after experiencing great joys and sorrows, he became even more decisive in his actions. And before jumping into the sea, he had already decided where he was going. Moxie's lair, Xianxia Island. There is a compass and a chart. There are magic weapons and spiritual stones. Zhu Feng is not just a headless fly running around. The most important thing is that Xianxia Island is far away from Yunzhou continent, so he will never meet acquaintances again. From now on, I will not trust anyone. I will practice my Tao by myself. I will get my destiny by myself. There was a light in Zhu Feng's eyes that should not belong to his age, and he continued to swim towards the west with the help of the magic weapon. On the flying boat, both of them were extremely relaxed. Until Sun Qinyang suddenly said something. Zhu Yun, I'm sorry. Zhu Yun raised his eyebrows, and then joked, it's strange, Sect Master Sun can actually say these three words. Zhu Yun, stop making trouble. Sun Qinyang's face turned red, and then she said seriously, I didn't protect your brother. My brother? Zhu Yun's face darkened. Ever since this boy dared to kill his master, he no longer recognized Zhu Feng as his younger brother. Why, he's not your brother. Seeing Zhu Yun's reaction, Sun Qinyang almost thought she had said the wrong thing. There is no doubt that Zhou Ruyu is Ergu's biological sister, so she doesn't think there is a problem with Zhu Feng's identity. Snort. Zhu Yun snorted coldly, Zhu Yun, can do such a thing as killing my master, how can I still recognize him? Now that he is dead in the sea, he deserves it. Wish Yun. Sun Qinyang shouted, why do you say such heartless words? Am I ruthless? How could I be ruthless? When I learned from Zhou Ruyu that when he came to Lingjian sect, even in the face of more than 10 threats in the foundation building period, he went deep into it and wanted to take him away personally. If I hadn't met you and Tang Zhuyang who were still Jian Tianming, I would have left a long time ago. But by chance, you became the master of the Spirit Sword sect and accepted him as your direct disciple. I am also very happy. If Tang Zhuyang doesn't get out of trouble, if things go wrong here, I will naturally give him a blessing when I return to Lingjian sect. I won't say that it will make his path to immortality smooth, but at least it won't be difficult to cultivate to the foundation building stage. Sun Qinyang was a little confused by Zhu Yun's words. She seemed to have thought of something, and said, then why didn't you say a word to him when you were in Lingjian sect? Zhu Yun sighed, and then said, this kid called me trash when we first met, which shows how much he misunderstood me. No matter what I say to him, he will never believe it from the bottom of his heart, and even reject it. So, I thought that if I ignored him for a while, he would also have plans to come to the sea area, and if you accepted him as a disciple, you would more or less talk about things related to me, which would dispel his thoughts. Sun Qinyang was dumbfounded. She had no idea that Zhu Yun had such a plan. But now, I don't know whether that kid was shattered to pieces or buried in the belly of a fish. Zhu Yun. Sun Qinyang knew that she had misunderstood Zhu Yun, but she didn't know how to apologize. That's all. Zhu Yun waved his hand and said, this matter has nothing to do with you. Neither you nor I know why he was kidnapped by Tang Zhuyang. Everything is fate. Then Uncle Zhu sighed. Originally, I would never appear in front of him again. Now that Zhu Feng is dead, I should tell him the news myself. After saying this, the two of them fell silent at the same time. They were speechless all the way, until they saw the mainland again. They felt like they were returning home, and they wished they could go back to Lingjian sect immediately. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 240. Spirit Sword Sect. Mengwei had long been unconscious. It was only the fake wood spirit bead on her chest that continuously released a kind of vitality, which prevented her from dying. I don't know how to explain to Xiaozu and junior sister Sun when they come back. Ergu looked disappointed and leaned aside. This was once Mu Hui's residence. He was not familiar with other places, and only here did he know that Mengwei was sleeping and was not disturbed. After being injured that day, Sun Qiniang flew away from the sect, and the entire sect was in chaos again. Some ordinary disciples who were overwhelmed by the disturbance eventually left the sect. Fortunately, Zhou Ruyu stood up. Together with Yu Yulin, they stabilized the situation. He must be a leading figure of the new generation. The other one was a senior brother with decades of experience in the sect. But as long as Sun Qiniang did not return, the Spirit Sword sect would not be able to get on the right track. "Brother, is the sister still awake?" At this time, Zhou Ruyu pushed the door open and came in with a bowl of medicine in his hand. "Well, thank you for your hard work." Ergu stood up. Mengwei was also brought here by Zhou Ruyu, and she has been taking care of him these days. Feeding medicine, wiping the body, changing clothes, etc. It is inconvenient for Ergu. Not hard. Zhou Ruyu smiled, and then dimmed again, saying, "Brother, if Sister Meng is like this, Brother Xiaozu will be sad to death when he comes back." "Little girl, don't worry too much." Ergu glanced at her sideways, shook his head and walked out of the room. "Will Xiaozu be sad?" "Impossible. This is just a blockhead. Even this idiot knows that Mengwei is in love with him. But he is unmoved. I don't know if he really doesn't understand, or his heart is as solid as a rock." Even when they were in the secret realm, Luo Yanran also said something with a hidden meaning, that Mengwei could be betrothed to Zuyun. If it weren't for Zuyun's help every time Mengwei was in trouble, Ergu almost thought that Zuyun and Mengwei had a grudge. "Alas, what can I do now? Tang Zhuyang ran away, and Zhu Feng is gone. Xiaozu, Xiaozu, I'm afraid I can't face you." Whenever Zhou Ruyu came here, it would take an hour, and Ergu would go back to the cave to take a look. Some footprints were left outside the cave. In the entire Lingjian sect, only Zhu Feng's footprints were so small. But the last footprint Ergu could find was at the bottom of the Magian cliff. The stone pillar was broken, and the formation was destroyed. He vaguely guessed the result in his heart. Zhu Feng was deceived and destroyed by Tang Zhuyang, and then taken away by Tang Zhuyang. In the house, Zhou Ruyu fed Mengwei a medicine. These were the earthly herbs she ordered the disciples in the sect to buy in the market town at the foot of the mountain, and then boiled. But there was no effect. That's right. Even if Mengwei becomes immortal, he is still a den-forming body. What's the use of this ordinary herb? Ergu didn't tell Zhou Ruyu about this, for fear of hurting her kindness. After feeding all the medicine, Zhou Ruyu looked at Mengwei's flawless face. "Brother Xiaozu has a really good eye. If I were also a man, I would definitely like it. But you are just a mortal woman, are you worthy? You will hinder Brother Xiaozu's cultivation." As she spoke, she looked down at Mengwei's neck again. On the white jade skin, the fake wood spirit bead flashed green light, constantly warming Mengwei's body. "I'm afraid this necklace was also given by Brother Xiaozu. I'm so envious. Brother Xiaozu never took me out to play before." Zhou Ruyu stretched out her hand and dragged the fake wood spirit bead in her palm. Waves of coldness passed through the skin, and then turned to the whole body, which was extremely comfortable. If my brother didn't know about the existence of this necklace, I really want to take it for myself. As he said this, Joruyu reluctantly let go of his hand and let the necklace return to its original position. However, a cold female voice suddenly sounded with extreme temptation. "Do you, really want me?" Joruyu was startled and stood up from the edge of the bed. Who is talking?" "Little girl, don't panic. It's me, I'm talking." There seemed to be a hint of teasing in the voice, and Joruyu realized that it was coming from the bead. Who are you?" she said in horror. The 7th level of Qi refining, and only walked through the territory controlled by the Spirit Sword sect. She couldn't understand this scene. He, little girl, I am the spirit of this necklace magic weapon, have you heard of spirit?" Spirit? Joruyu was startled and a little bit unbelievable. She had heard of these two words. It is said that the best magic weapon, after being nurtured for a long time, will have spiritual intelligence. This is the spirit of the weapon. Could it be? This is a treasure? Joruyu's eyes lit up and his breathing became rapid. It seems that you have heard it? The voice interrupted Joruyu's thoughts. Why are you talking to me? Forcing herself to calm her breathing, Joruyu said in a deep voice. She was still able to maintain her rationality and restrain her impulse and greed. He, little girl, my master is only immortal and is about to die, I can no longer play my powerful role, do you think I will be willing? The voice was a little tempting, slowly magnifying Joruyu's greed. You mean, you want to recognize me as your master? Joryu knew what the spirit meant. Of course. My magic weapon should belong to those who are destined and capable. You are so young, but you are already in the 7th level of Qi refining. Moreover, you are so beautiful, you are worthy of me. The implication seems to be that Menghui is immortal. Are you really willing to recognize me as your master? Joryu was infatuated, and excitement occupied her heart. Of course, as long as you take me off and put it on your neck, and then drip a drop of blood, I will recognize you as my master. Okay. Joryu walked towards Menghui step by step. She wanted to tear the necklace off. But she knew that this would damage this treasure. This thing will belong to her, and she doesn't want to have any flaws. However, when her hands just touched the clasp of the necklace and were about to untie it, a huge spiritual power suddenly surged out. Boom! The explosion sounded, and Joryu was immediately knocked away. The wooden door shattered, and wood chips flew everywhere. Cough cough. Joryu struggled to get up from the ground, with blood oozing from the corners of her mouth and her hair disheveled. She no longer looked like a disciple of the master. What frightened her the most was the surging spiritual power in her body, which almost destroyed her danshan. If she hadn't coughed up a mouthful of blood, she would have been seriously injured. What's going on? Joryu was traumatized, and her eyes became clearer. She took out a nourishing pill from her storage bag and swallowed it, and her qi and blood became stable. This sister has no grudges against me, and she loves brother Xiaozu and is familiar with him. Why do I feel so jealous? Since Ergu left the house, she began to recall the scenes that happened. The more she thought about it, the more frightened she became. That wasn't herself. Junior sister Jo, what's wrong with you? At this time, Yu Yulin suddenly appeared. He was not far from here, and hurried over after hearing the noise. Seeing Joryu in such a state, he was also shocked. Nothing. Joryu smiled bitterly and said, by the way, go find my brother, and don't worry about other things for now. Don't tell other brothers. Now that the master is not here, the sect is in turmoil and people's hearts are scattered. If there are more accidents, I'm afraid that our efforts during this period will be wasted. Brother, of course you know. Please wait for a moment and heal your wounds first. Yu Yulin also took out a bottle of nourishing essence pills, which were given to him by Zhu Yun. Thank you, brother. I have taken the pills. Zhou Ruyu politely refused, and Yu Yulin no longer forced him and ran towards the Magian cliff. He knew that Ergu was not here these days, so he was in the cave on the mountain road down the Magian cliff. After seeing Yu Yulin leave, Zhou Ruyu looked into the house. Meng Wei was intact, and the voice of the weapon spirit just disappeared. She didn't know what caused this. Fortunately, she had been practicing hard and reacted quickly just now, so she didn't die. It seems that I can't enter this room casually. When my brother comes, I have to tell him about this. Zhou Ruyu stood there, still a little confused in her heart. What was the purpose of this weapon spirit? Kill me? Impossible, I have no grudges against it. After thinking about it, Zhou Ruyu couldn't figure it out. Until a familiar voice suddenly came from the air. Disciple, who bullied you? Zhou Ruyu looked up quickly, only to see Sun Qiniang standing in the air, and Zhu Yun standing beside her with a sword. She couldn't help but shouting with joy, Master, little brother Zhu. The two fell down separately, and Zhou Ruyu threw herself into Sun Qiniang's arms and cried with joy. But Zhu Yun, looking at the sawdust all over the floor, suddenly focused his gaze and looked into the house. What happened to her? Suddenly, murderous intent rose up.